My name is Julie Holland. I'm a psychiatrist. I've been involved in psychedelics for many decades. One of my earliest sort of group therapy experiences was passing a joint around when I was 12, 13 years old with other kids and laughing and sharing stories. Um, I had a pretty intense psychedelic experience in my teenage years that got me really interested in harm reduction and schizophrenia because I inadvertently took PCP when I was trying to take mescaline. Um, anyway, I ended up just going to med school and being very interested in psychosis and studying schizophrenia. And I took MDMA for the first time in 1985, and it was pretty exciting for me because I was pretty sure I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and this was a new drug that psychiatrists were using. So the excitement of that sort of helped me get through kind of, the boring med school and residency. And that's where I met Jeremy, actually, when I was a psych resident. I was living in New York City at Mount Sinai. And we met at a party for Terence McKenna. So we had sort of a psychedelic basis of our relationship right off the bat. And you, honey?
People ask me, you also a doctor, and I say no, I'm a patient. So I was always an English major, a writer, photographer, an artist. I went to college and played music. I wasn't as serious about my studies as Julie was. I was, I came from kind of a liberal family. I grew up in hippie towns. My father was a professor, so I was always in what seemed like counterculture then, and I was always aware that drugs were part of that counterculture. Very young age, 10 or 11, 12 years old. I was at a big concert at UMass, University of Massachusetts, where my father taught, and was passed a joint, and I felt all the thrill, and you kind of it was give you a sense of adulthood to be in that culture. I don't think the first time I got smoked, I got stoned, which is typical, but I felt the cultural component of that scene. So I sort of grew up in that. In college, I tried everything. I tried mushrooms. I tried LSD. Usually at really stupid set and settings. So I had pretty bad. I mean, I got a sense of the power and the fragility of reality. That was a lesson that I learned. But I did not have positive experiences. I didn't have transformative experiences. I had pretty frightening experiences. So I'm a little different from Julie in that I'm kind of not a psychonaut, and I think I bring a perspective. Having been around Julie, we just had the 30th anniversary of that day we met with through Terence McKenna. So and I've been, I've known all the people in the scene almost as long as I've known Julie. I've met Rick Doblin probably within a year. So a lot of the people in the scene are old friends of mine, and I have a view, a little bit of an outsider's perspective on them. On the other hand, I definitely have my own psychedelic experiences, mainly with cannabis, sometimes touched with ketamine, and also experiences in my life that I think are equivalent places that you can go to without necessarily, having to be hit over the head with the frying pan. I've learned a lot about intention and ceremony and nature and all those things and relationships and music as components of what feels like a psychedelic experience in terms of the way that it can open doors and the way it can confront the shadow, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But it's turned out to work out as a really good dyad to have those two perspectives, and we're always exchanging ideas. And it may look like it's another word for fighting.
We're exchanging ideas passionately
with volume,
and sometimes interrupting each other.
Yeah.
One of the things that psychedelics has sort of allowed us to do is to find a balance between the two energies and the yin and the yang. Um, I'm mostly yang and Jeremy's mostly yin. So, but it, he says he doesn't identify as psychonaut, but then I have to remind him like all these other things that he has experienced. Um, but the balance works well.
As my main experience as an artist includes these ineffable moments, or like being transported to something that I don't understand, where I bring back something. There's a lot in the artistic experience that overlaps with the psychedelic, and that's kind of more my day to day, is that I have these mini experiences in my day to day.
So, well, just to address the first part of your question, psychedelic means mind manifesting. And if you use that definition, lots and lots of things are psychedelic, because even something like meditation shows you how you think. So, but if you say pharmacologically, then you have these outliers, right? Ketamine is an outlier, cannabis is an outlier, MDMA is an outlier, because the classical psychedelics, they all sort of tickle this 5-HT2A receptor, and they all work in a similar way. But, behaviorally, or in terms of what's going on internally, I think it's fair to say that cannabis and ketamine act as psychedelics. They help you see how your mind works. Relationship acts as a psychedelic in that it helps you see how your mind works. Relationship acts as a psychedelic in that it forces you to look at your shit and confront your shadow. But for years, you just project your shit and your shadow onto the other person, and they're so conveniently located for blame and projected self-hatred. And so if you're going to stay together for 30 years, at some point, you're going to start to work on this stuff. And you can fight a little bit every day and chip away at it. But what is also really effective is if the two of you take MDMA and your defenses are down and you feel more trusting and less fearful, that you can really share and get into some deep issues. So,
talk about our experience soon after we met.
Why don't you, Doug? Well, tell us what happened.
Well, you remember better. Very soon after we met, we went to this beautiful garden in New York City, in Central Park, Conservatory Garden, and I took MDMA for the first time. Julie had.
It wasn't exactly
Julie
my first time.
was more experienced. And so very early on in our relationship, we had really deep talks. I mean, I've never had a rave experience. All of my experiences with MDMA have been, therapeutic. That's just naturally where I go. I'm just fascinated by what I'm comfortable talking about. I want to, explore things. So that was established very early on in our relationship. And I think, we tend to do it. We did it maybe a little bit more often at the beginning, but not much more than once a year or twice a year at the most. And now it's every couple of years, or
even less frequent.
Yeah,
but when it does come around, it is we get a lot of work done. And you said all of your MDMA experiences have been therapeutic, and so have mine, but mine have also sometimes been recreational. And so I did go to raves back in the day, really when I was in med school and residency, just because that was sort of the timing of them for where I was in my life. But those were also therapeutic. But I
would like to hear your memory of the Conservatory Garden.
So it was a beautiful day in May, and the garden was peaking, and there were tulips everywhere. And we didn't move for a long time. We talked and talked and talked, and finally we had to kind of like physically extricate ourselves and just to walk around and move around. But the end of the story is that that's where we got married, in that very spot.
4 years.
We had
later.
Our wedding there, almost exactly 4 years later. Yeah, and when we go back to that spot, when we go to that garden, I feel kind of, what I used to call exy. Like I feel a little altered.
It was basically across the street from where Horizons was last year. When Horizons was uptown, it was basically so we could just go and and walk across the street and go in there. And yeah, we always feel an energy when we go into that place.
Yeah, it's a pretty
And
magical
we used to bring
space.
our children there and take pictures of our kids there.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of association with that
Yeah.
experience.
And when we really got in a bad place at one point in our marriage, we used MDMA and someone else to sort of help us find our way back. And it didn't do all of the work, but it got us on back on the path of sort of doing that work. But relationships take work. You have to tend a garden, or it's gonna look like shit. So it's good, to have some sessions where you're pulling weeds and adding manure so things grow better.
And again, I definitely consider cannabis by any definition a psychedelic. And I think it's like the sort of elephant in the room of psychedelics. And when you go to these conferences where everybody's talking about everything else, they're all smoking pot. They're all having pot inspired ideas, insights. Really informs the community, but I still feel like it's in a state of what I call desacralization. Like it's not considered a sacred medicine, and I think it's part of the repression of yin. I really think there's kind of still a huge missed opportunity with cannabis in our country now. There has been a revolution. It is pretty much legal in most places, but it's still fruity names and gummies, and it's not given. The medicine component is really not developed. I still think it's repressed
Yeah,
in
and the
some sense.
spiritual component, especially.
And I think it's self-repressed because we all sort of grew up with, in America it was Cheech and Chong. It was like the model of the stoner hippies.
Yeah, who are like inept and ineffectual.
But in the day-to-day life, it really informs a lot of people in terms of ideas and also in terms of health. There's a lot of health benefits. It
Yeah,
really can
I
talk.
feel like, some of the busiest, most productive, healthiest people I know are regular cannabis users. And I don't think there's any modeling of that kind of behavior, in our media.
But it is changing, and I do think it is kind of a quiet revolution that has happened here, and that we were just in London, and it was almost startling to me how cannabis naive they are, and how they're still, what I call alcohol culture is such a dominant force. And I think alcohol culture and cannabis culture are sort of, I mean, at war is too big a word.
They're in conflict
But
a little bit.
they're in conflict, and one threatens the other. And I'm sure the alcohol companies know what percentage they're losing to cannabis users, and they're trying to appeal to them in different ways. But I was surprised. I don't know how it is in Europe, but I was very surprised in London how naive they seemed about things. Because of Michael Pollan's book, it is kind of in the idea of psychedelics having therapeutic potential um, has really permeated in America. But it seemed like I mean, maybe we had a small sample size, but it seemed like in England, I was surprised how that was still kind of a novel idea, and that cannabis is still, it's like,
Stigmatized or
it's like 40 years ago
relegated
in the
to the.
United States. It seems a little backwards. I don't know how that carries over to the rest of Europe.
But we love London and we had a great time. We've been to Europe a lot. I mean, to England a lot. Our daughter lives in London. We love going there. And I mean, to me, it's like a challenge, that if I ever leave America, then I'll go to the UK and try to educate people about cannabis and psychedelics so that they get on board. Because I do think, aside from the Breaking Convention conference where everybody, you're preaching to the choir, but you start talking to just people who live in the country and they really look at you askance, like you can't be serious. So I think there's a lot of work to be done around just sort of educating people.
And one thing I really liked about Breaking Convention is that it's not USA centric. It's not America centric. It's really European centric, and it's nice. It's nice to sort of hear, sort of fresh, young, optimistic ideas, because we're in a little bit of a dark moment in the United States. So it was good to be around, to be away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely sensed, like Rick Doblin of MAPS talking, his last few talks have really focused more on, okay, things are stalled out in America for now, but look what's happening all over the world. And there's so much psychedelic research happening in all these countries that you would never think would do anything. So there is still a lot of hope. And, we've been going to a lot of conferences. We're kind of conferenced out, I think, which is, and especially the domestic conferences, all the MAPS and South by Southwest and Horizons. I love Horizons because it's in New York City, and it's like really our home base, and it's a lot of our friends. But so now, because we've done so many of these domestic conferences, we're both really focusing on, like we're going to Portugal soon, and we're going to Boom, and we're going to be in Sweden at Stockholm, and we've been to Iceland twice. We've been to Breaking Convention now 3 times. So just really focusing on kind of spreading the word more internationally.
And for me, it's very hopeful when the people that I'm getting to know in sort of the younger generation in Europe, in Israel, and just how dedicated and intelligent the people in the field are. I mean, as a sort of hanger on, part of what keeps me interested in the field is the people, and I think they're smart, and also they're funny. To me, that's very important. Humor is another psychedelic. When you can get people to laugh, and you have a rhythmic physiological release. I mean, I think comedians are a form of shaman who can do that to you. Same with music, same with crying, same with orgasm. So these are other, for me, meta psychedelic or quasi psychedelic experiences that are available.
One of the things all those things have in common is oxytocin, post-orgasmic state, laughing, connecting, being with friends, psychedelics, childbirth, nursing. They all have oxytocin in common. And a lot of them are really altered states or connected altered states, laughing together. I mean, this is like we're not the only primates who laugh. This is like a biological function to unite people, laughter, and to bring up oxytocin and bring down fear, and for bonding, trusting and bonding. So trust is like the opposite of fear. And so all of these psychedelic states have oxytocin in common. And it's a really important mammalian, system that is set up for us, not only to bond with other people, but also it's one of the main ways that our bodies heal itself is with oxytocin. So it's a really important neurotransmitter and hormone.